Benetton.
Yes, friends, on a Thursday, it's the OGP One Giant podcast where I'm your host at Adam Armbrecht over on Twitter, covering the Brooklyn Nets, the Locked On Nets podcast as well. And that's Andrew Makowitz. You can find him at, what is it, Andy Mac 14? Clarify this once I finish the introduction, because I keep doing this at the top of the show, and I keep not knowing your Twitter handle. Andrew Makowitz, lifelong, generational, season ticket holder of the New York Football Giants. On a Thursday, how are we, sir?
I'm good. It's AMAC214. But Adam, I like just responding to everyone from the OGP handle, like that's just easiest for us to do,
That's right. Sometimes, yeah, listen, if you're over there on Twitter and you're interacting with us, a lot of times Andy Makowitz is the one behind the wheel of the OGP Twitter handle because it's a delicate balance for me. I'm not going to lie to you. I get in the weeds pretty quickly when it comes to Twitter conversations. I have a hard time being objective, maybe, or I have a hard time not pushing back when I think a take is bad. See the Daniel Jones out of the game last week when it was a blowout discussion. But for this week, as we know, Andy, the New York Football Giants will be taking on the Carolina Panthers. We're going to get into that. You have some interesting notes on that side of things as well. But we start with where we always do on a week-to-week basis, the injury updates, where kind of this team stands right now coming into game number 7, 1-5, feeling like maybe things have gone a little bit off the rails for them. In that regard, you've got Kadarius Toney. That's not going to happen for you. Kenny Golladay trying to work his way back. You do have some very interesting notes as of yesterday. Elerson Smith, rookie, as we know, and as well as Aaron Robinson, they got back out on the practice field, so there's a chance that they could be a part of this. A player like CJ Board, who got moved to injured reserve after breaking his arm. That's something we didn't even touch on in the melee that was on a return, ends up with a broken arm. He'll be done for the year. So it's like even the sub players are going down left and right for the Giants. Takeaways from this really far-reaching injury report. Didn't even touch on the likes of Andrew Thomas and some other players on the offensive side as well.
Yeah, so there's a ton of injuries. This goes without saying. This has been the number one storyline, other than the Giants not being able to win close games early on in the season. It's tough because it's a revolving door. Andrew Thomas on IR is a huge injury. I don't think we really understood his impact on this team going into it. We were hoping that he was going to take a leap, but he's like one of the only tackles in the league. He's one of 5 tackles in the league that has not given up a sack yet this year. So, like, he is the guy for us. And having him be on IR and not out there to protect Daniel Jones' blind side is a big challenge. But, Adam,
the fact that this makes now 2 years in a row where he's dealt with injuries, right? That's just like from a big picture perspective, players' injuries are some guys are more prone to or not. Something to keep an eye on, too, for what we think is supposed to be our stud left tackle of the future.
Yeah, so I have a bigger question for you, and this is one that I haven't heard many people talk about on Giants social media, is at what point do we go from, wow, the Giants are very unlucky with the injury bug, to, hey, we've had the same strength and conditioning coach for a couple of years now, and this has been running rampant with the Giants, and maybe there's an issue outside of that, because I know that some of these things happen in the game, but we're talking about hamstring injuries. We're talking about other things that maybe not always are just part of the game script. You could tell me that the Giants are very unlucky, and I'll believe you. But at some point, Adam, we have like 50 people that are. It's like, when does it become luck, bad luck, and coincidence? And when does it become something that we look at? I don't know, the strength and conditioning coach to say, like, are we getting players prepared physically and mentally the right way for these games?
Yeah, and like in the last handful of years, everyone talks about the lack of training camp, the lack of preseason games, that helps or hurts conditioning. And there's that thing of when you get, getting hit more, you think can lead to more injuries, but not getting hit enough doesn't strengthen you well enough to take those hits. But to your point, I'll put in the context that you'll understand as a New York Yankees fan, right? That feels like a team that always seems to, on a year-to-year basis, deal with injuries across the board throughout their roster. They're always losing a couple starting pitchers. They're always losing a handful of outfielders. They're always dealing with these type of things. And I do, at some point, whatever the percentage is that we've seen go down for the Giants this year, I mean, it seems like it's been decimated. But go back to last year too, right? It's a reoccurring theme. I think that it's fair. And when we talk about the idea of, well, who's on the hot seat, the GM, the head coach, the coordinators, all that stuff, it has to go down even further than that into every area of the organization. And that includes strength and conditioning, because there's a difference between being physically fit, physically tough, having the muscle mass, versus are you focusing on flexibility? Are you focusing on the stretching components of things that sometimes we talk about nagging injuries, hamstrings, little things like that, and then even some of the bigger ones, right? But when you look across this team, some of them, like I'll just take a couple examples, like the Kadarius Toney injury. Well, that's an ankle, it gets rolled over, or even the Saquon Barkley one, right? Fluky, steps on a foot. I'm not pinning that on them, but anytime that it's a strain, anytime that it's a hamstring, any of those type of injuries, those are conditioning injuries. Those are preparation injuries. And that's where you have to look inside, Monday through Saturday on a normal week and say, are we doing enough, or are we doing enough of the right things to make sure that our players are ready to play? And then on the back end, what are we doing for recovery to make sure that they're coming out of Sunday and able to go back into a week of practice in the next game?
Yeah, and look, it's not all on strength and conditioning, but I do think preparation is part of this, because if you continually see this happen over and over, there's only so many times that you can say it's a fluke. But Adam, when we talk about the other piece of it, is every team deals with injuries in the NFL, because it is a very violent sport that has contact in it. People will get injured. But I have a great example of where this points more towards Dave Gettleman and the front office than anywhere else. And
Yeah,
that
I love
is,
it.
look at tonight's Thursday night game between the Denver Broncos and the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns are without their starting quarterback Baker Mayfield. They're out their all-pro running back in Nick Chubb. They're out their second string running back who could be starting in the league, Kareem Hunt. They're out Odell Beckham Jr., who's going to be out today. They don't know what they're going to be getting from Jarvis Landry. They are decimated with injuries. And yet, the team that we lost to, the Denver Broncos, that we were underdogs against, they're still favored in this Thursday night football game with all of those rash of injuries. It goes to show the roster construction and depth that someone like the Cleveland Browns has is drastically different than what the Giants have. And you can't lay it on, oh well, the Giants are riddled with a quarterback making 40 million. Of course you can't do that. No, they're both on rookie contracts right now, which should allow you to build a team around it that is sustainable, so that when one guy goes down, it's not a huge debilitating injury to your team.
Yeah, that's a big part of it for sure. Because when you think about, like, I just pulled up the Giants roster, and from a depth perspective, right? We all know Saquon Barkley is supposed to be the bell cow, the number one here. But and I don't have anything against Devontae Booker, but you mentioned, right, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, these 1-2 punches that you have around the league. We've seen other really good teams that obviously have good offensive lines, like the Kansas City Chiefs. You're going to lose Hilaire for a couple of weeks. Okay, you have Williams come right in, just consistency in behind them. Offensive line is, I think, something you leave out of it. You'd certainly say, at least on paper, the Giants had some nice depth pieces at the wide receiver spot. But then over on the defensive side, right? When you talk about some of these linebackers coming or going, and what is the quality at the starting level first and foremost. But TJ Brunson goes to IR, but Quincy Roach is a rookie we're taking a look at. Cam Brown has been injured, hasn't been on the field, but he's buried. Carter Coughlin, right? Like, in behind them, and then go inside of the secondary and say, well, if we've had some injuries there, we know that with our rookie class, again, Aaron Robinson coming back, but Sam Beal is still on this roster, right? Like, he's still listed on this depth chart. And when you talk about going from who your starters are and maybe needing to buy a handful of reps in a given game, or a couple of weeks when you deal with injuries, this is the hard part about, and one of the areas I think you can criticize Dave Gettleman in terms of, hey, this thing was a mess when you came in. The money was all bad. The roster was terrible. Okay. But over 4 years, the goal needs to be, how do you bring the level of the team up, obviously, from a starter perspective, and then also make sure that you have respectable balance from a depth side of things as well. And I don't want to get too far afield here, but I just had this conversation yesterday with Pessimistic Mike, where it's eerily similar what Dave Gettleman chose to do in this past offseason to what Jerry Reese tried to do at the end of his tenure. You went out and spent big free agent money, right? And we actually just came, I want to get your take on this before we move into other stuff. We had just came to this conclusion of they should have brought back Dalvin Tomlinson at a reasonable salary, not signed Kenny Galladay, not signed Adoree Jackson, and just given yourself some more cap room and just held on to it and accepted that we're not there yet. This false narrative of we can compete this year. We believe in this team. You end up overspending in free agency. And now next season, next offseason, you're going to keep having these contracts that you have to deal with when you're really far closer to being a rebuilding roster than a competing roster. So that's the footnote of what goes on here. But I think you're 100% right. The roster construction top to bottom is not good enough.
Yeah, I mean, so listen, I will give Dave Gettleman a little bit of a pass in one regard. Everyone says we should have brought back Dalvin Tomlinson. And listen, we all love Dalvin Tomlinson. We all thought he was great. There, other Giant beat writers, I think Art Stapleton even mentioned this. The Giants have tried 3 different times to sign Dalvin Tomlinson back to an agreement. They just couldn't come to terms. The Adoree Jackson signing wasn't in spite of Dalvin Tomlinson because Adoree Jackson happened later in the game, and got re-signed. Now, if you want to say, hey, save that cap space for something else, a rainy day, I think Dave Gettleman was saying that's, the rainy day is Adoree Jackson, a young 25-year-old first round cornerback that you could build around. Now, clearly that hasn't looked to be the best move possible. And I'll give you an example as to why it's a challenge. The Giants' 4 highest paid players, I believe, are Leonard Williams, Kenny Galladay, James Bradbury, and Adoree Jackson, right? Those 4 people make up a boatload of the Giants' cap space. And the question is, are those 4 pieces that you build a winning team around? Are those the 4 pieces that are the linchpins of a Super Bowl team? You look at the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, they pay Mahomes, they pay Kelsey, they pay Tyreek Hill, they play Chris Jones on defense. Maybe they pay Frank Clark a little bit, pass rushers. Like, that seems more like a roster construction that is set for a Super Bowl, and you fill in complementary pieces around it. The Giants, I don't know. I to get your take on those players in particular, those 4 guys making up the majority of the cap space for the Giants.
No, and that's the problem, right? Like, you could say that Leonard Williams is that piece of things, right? That he can be the centerpiece based on his age, the defensive element, all that stuff. Not necessarily a pure pass rusher, but okay, he can be a cornerstone piece for you. But that's the issue, is that James Bradbury, again, James Bradbury at his price point makes all the sense in the world for a team that's going to the playoffs and wants to have a little bit of a run. That's where that cornerback makes sense at that age. It doesn't make sense for where the Giants are. You can sell me on Adoree Jackson, right? Right age. He could be here for the entire contract, maybe even a second contract, and be a quality player for this team. But that's the question that you have to keep asking is, where are we from a competitive standpoint, and where does it make sense to spend the money? And that's, I'll touch back on the Tomlinson one just quickly here, is that he signed an almost fully guaranteed 2-year contract at 16 million. It ends up being somewhere around there. 16 million guaranteed. I mean, it's like, all right, so what would it like when you say, when the Giants say they couldn't quite get there? Well, you chose not to get there. I mean, nuts and bolts of it, you chose not to get to that number with Dalvin Tomlinson. And I can respect that decision. And again, I'll even go the extra layer and say, then don't bring back Dalvin Tomlinson. But also don't sign Adoree Jackson and don't sign Kenny Galladay, because it's not worth it right now to do that for where you are as a team and where you are in this process. So it's just, listen, we've gone around with this. Everybody does on Dave Gettleman and where his responsibility lies. And the conclusion that I've come to is, like, it's never just the GM. It's the ownership. It's the scouting department. It's those guys on the computers. They call them, the analytics department. It's the trainers, right? All of these things matter. It's the coaching staff top to bottom and how they develop the talent that you bring in. So that's that piece of where do the Giants go from here? And as we turn over to the Carolina Panthers game, I'll just reiterate this fact that if we get a look at Elerson Smith and a look at Aaron Robinson now coming into this game, that's exciting. Like, that should be something exciting that the Giants and Giants fans should be looking forward to. I don't know what Elerson Smith is going to be. He was regarded as a really nice prospect, and they got him at a good spot in the draft. Hey, maybe that shows a little something, even if it is to say, so long, O'Shane Ximenez or Lorenzo Carter, we know, you know what I mean? Like, we know that things are going to be shifting here coming out of this season, no matter what had happened, whether they were super successful or not. There was going to be cap restrictions. You're going to look to see how these young talents develop. So let's be excited about that aspect of it.
Yeah. So I was going to say the Elerson Smith is exactly the type of thing the Giants need. They need an influx of talent that might be able to get to the quarterback. And that's been the big challenge is the Giants have lacked a pass rush. And what's interesting is you look over at this matchup against the Carolina Panthers coming in, that's actually one of their strengths and probably going to be one of the areas that you're going to want to highlight and focus on this matchup, Adam.
Oh, of course, man. So listen, you go over and you take a look at the Carolina Panthers roster. I'm going to highlight two players right out the gate. One of them, by the way, relatively young man. You may have remembered him as we were going through some of the drafts in the past couple of seasons for the New York Football Giants. First with Hassan Riddick, out of the labeled as a linebacker, has 6.5 sacks, dealt with injuries, and then was able to really come on this season. But the Carolina Panthers, who, they get labeled maybe as a 3-4, but they work at 3-3-5 sometimes. Again, multiple look defense. That's the way that almost it seems like every defense is in this league this year. But 6.5 sacks for him. And then Brian Burns, he's the other guy, right? Big boy, big body. When you looked at him coming out of the draft, you thought, is he a little bit too stiff? Is he going to have enough range? He's having success. He only has 3 sacks on the year, but he's had the pressures, 21 total tackles. And I just wanted to make sure I get this right here. 4 pass deflections, 5 tackles for a loss as well on it, to go along with 8 assist tackles. I mean, those two players right there, when you talk about no Andrew Thomas, you talk about a decimated line, these are the key players that you look at from this matchup and from just roster construction. Look how it helps you, right? The Carolina Panthers are not a perfectly constructed team, but on the defensive side of the ball, when you have a couple players like this, all of a sudden it can help to dictate tempo, help put the Giants in 3rd and longs, and get some pressure on Daniel Jones. So, I mean, that just seems like the very obvious with what we're dealing with on our side and where their biggest strength is defensively. That's a recipe for a potentially difficult matchup for the Giants.
Adam, you mentioned Hassan Reddick. It's a name that Giant fans will probably be familiar with because he was with the Arizona Cardinals last year, became a free agent, and was out on the open market. And we had discussions about how he would be a nice addition to this team, get an influx of edge rush passing, pass pressure ability. He signed a 1-year, $8 million deal with Carolina. Right. And I hate to
maybe Hassan Reddick, Noah Dory Jackson, maybe a Hassan Reddick.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even like for like,
No,
Kenny Galladay is making 18, 19 million, and Adoree Jackson's making almost 15 million. It's like, a 1-year, $8 million thing. And I've seen, social media set ablaze with Dave Gettleman being allergic to having any type of pass rusher or paying pass rushers. Like,
it's like shellfish.
Right. It's like Kyler Fackrell. Oh, you in a start making $3 million, you got us like 5 or 6 sacks. See you later. Oh, Marcus Golden, like you came off a 10-sack season, you're making $5 million. See you later. It's like, oh, Hassan Reddick, you're a free agent. We can get you for under $10 million a year, and you're probably going to get 10 plus sacks. I'll see you later too. It is tough because what they do really well is get to the quarterback, and it's no secret that when you look at some of the defensive metrics of the Carolina Panthers, they're top 5 in the league in yards against this year. So, they're doing pretty well. I believe they're number 3 behind the Buffalo Bills and Cleveland Browns in team defense. So, like, it's going to be tough to play against them. And I do think that this is a key matchup. But I want to talk, Adam, a little bit about something that I thought was kind of shocking. And when you look at the Carolina Panthers, so they get out to a really hot start. They look good. Sam Darnold looks great. But let's actually look at a couple of different things, specifically maybe even around what Vegas thinks. Mm-hmm. So did you know that the only, I'm throwing away the Cleveland Browns game because their starting quarterback is hurt. But did you know that the only team that is playing this week that has a quarterback that has a higher QBR than the opposing quarterback and is the underdog in the game is the New York Football Giants. So the Giants statistically have a quarterback that has a better QBR than the person that they're playing against. And we're the only team in the league that's an underdog in that scenario. And what's even crazier is that it's a home game for the Giants too. So like, think about if this was a neutral or a road game, we statistically have the better quarterback, yet we're still underdogs and we're the only one on the board this week. Like, is that not a crazy stat to you?
Well, and again, from the outside looking in, you go, that's a crazy stat. And then from the inside, you go, right. And that's indicative of what is happening with this roster, whether through construction or through injury. This is what's around Daniel Jones right now, where on paper, you'd say, yeah, Daniel Jones is a better quarterback than Sam Darnold in totality. I'd rather have Daniel Jones than Sam Darnold. And yet, and by the way, if you're the Carolina Panthers and you could say, would you rather have Daniel Jones? I think that they would over Sam Darnold, right? But here we are in a game where you go, yeah, listen, you can be an average or below average, wherever you want to put Sam Darnold in your hierarchy of QBs. It's good enough when you have a team around him. And by the way, a team that started out hot to the beginning of the year and is now 3-3 in the Carolina Panthers. But that's what you can do when the roster overall is strong enough. When you have a defensive pass rush, you get to lean on different things. You get to mitigate some of the mistakes and some of the risks that you ask a quarterback to take. So listen, Daniel Jones coming off a terrible, as we know, game against the Rams with all of those turnovers, still has a better QBR than Sam Darnold. So think about that. That means that Sam Darnold over the course of the year, to whatever level of consistency, which that you try to put him on an even keel like that, Daniel Jones had the worst game of his career potentially from a statistical standpoint, and yet is still a more favored quarterback from that metric.
Okay, so I've got another crazy thing for you to think about.
All
Are
right.
we entirely convinced that the Carolina Panthers are a good team?
No,
Like,
I'm not.
they
I said at the
started
start
out
of the year, they're not a good team.
so, but they start out hot. They win some games, and everyone's like, "Look at Sam Darnold. Just needed to move from the Jets. He'll be amazing. It's good, great, grand." They have a top 3 defense, as I mentioned, in terms of yards, given up, team defense. But Adam, like, can we just look at the wins that they have? They've beaten the Texans, they've beaten the Jets, and they beat the Saints. And people could say the Saints are good, but guess what? The one Giants win is against the Saints on the road. So, like, when you look at the other pieces of it, it's like their losses. They got blown out to the Cowboys. They scored a couple touchdowns in garbage time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was literally the same script as the Giants game.
Yep.
And they lost to the Eagles and they were at home against the Eagles, which is a terrible loss against the Eagles. Mm-hmm. So, like, is anyone really convinced that the Carolina Panthers are like a playoff team right now?
No, 100% not. And again, that's, early in this season. And I think because of the Matt Rule tie and the speculation around what could have been when the Giants were looking to hire their next head coach, everyone kind of keeps an eye on what Carolina is doing, right? But to your point, that Saints win specifically, again, I was just talking about this yesterday, that the Saints, listen, Sean Payton, we get it. They're still one of the better teams in the league, just, from an execution, organization standpoint, right? But this is probably going to be that kind of down year for them. This is probably why you saw them say, we're going to run out Jameis Winston this year. Let's see if he's got a little something, because if not, we know we're going to retool some things here. We're going to have to rework this roster, the Michael Thomas situation, all that stuff, right? So no, this is not the Saints, like, quote unquote, right? This is just a team in the league. So when you look at those games, to your point, and then Houston, we all know what's going on in Houston. It's a mess down there. So the losses they have are against Dallas. Okay, hey, listen, everyone's going to lose to Dallas, it looks like. But Philadelphia and then Minnesota, overtime loss. Minnesota is not a world beater either. So basically, you've lost to average teams. You've beaten really bad teams. The question becomes, from a New York Football Giants perspective, is, are we one of the terrible teams? Or are we, an average team that's dealt with injuries? Where do we fall in that spectrum? Because if just from Carolina's standpoint, they'll get us, then they get Atlanta, and then they'll get New England before they get to Arizona. So they have a real chance to maybe right their ship up to 6-3 before hitting some more bad stretches of their schedule.
Or they could very easily lose all 3 of those games. Like, the Giants could come out and
100%.
beat them. Matt Ryan in Atlanta actually looks like a competent team. Like, we lost them. We're like, oh, you have to beat Atlanta. Atlanta strung a couple wins together. They're looking to get to 500. Matt Ryan's playing relatively well. And the Patriots, they have a decent defense. They have the bend don't break mentality. They're in a bunch of games. Like, this is interesting for the Carolina Panthers side, because they go from 500 to 3-6 or 6-3, and I don't know if anyone actually knows which way it's going to go.
And how about this, just in a big picture for them? Because why not give some context to other teams around the league? They finished their season, the last 4 weeks is at Buffalo, home for Tampa Bay, at New Orleans, and at Tampa Bay. So they're going to have 4 games at the end of their schedule with whatever happens over the next 5 or 6 weeks. Those last 4, you could be sitting there saying, hey, we're a 6-7 ball club. We're right in the mix with 7-6, whatever it is. And then you could go, oops, a daisy. Whoops, there I fell. And all of a sudden you're a team that finishes with double-digit losses. So in that spectrum, this is why, by the way, that some people still think, in spite of everything the Giants are dealing with, that they could somehow win this game.
I have gone back and forth on this quite a bit. And Adam, maybe we can kick it off into, like, what's Vegas saying? What's the over-under? Just to give everybody an idea of where we stand. So right now, the Giants are 3-point underdogs.
Andy leads this
Yes,
charge
this
because
is my
I get lost in the sauce sometimes. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of plus 100s versus 3-1 odds. It's not for me. Please, Andy, if you could.
Well, I'll break it down simply. The Giants are a 3-point underdog at home. The
Love it.
over under is 43 points, so they're expecting it to be a relatively low scoring game.
Now,
And what are your initial thoughts about that? And I'll go into a couple deeper stats on that.
well, it's tricky because if I do just keep up the idea of where Carolina's coming from, right? They late, but they put up 28 points against Dallas, 26 in their wins, not 20 to 27 points in their wins in those first few weeks of the season. They're giving up scores, a tight loss to Philadelphia, but my initial take is this is going to be a close football game and a relatively sloppy football game, maybe on both sides of the ball, where both teams are struggling, maybe even on the offensive side. And you're talking about you know, in the low 20s, 2017, 24, 21, right? Like something in that range there. And my take is Vegas is like, this thing, I don't know which way this thing's going to go, but it could be bad on either side.
Yeah, I think that's where Vegas is out obviously trending. They said basically saying first team to 20 is likely going to win this game, which it feels like that's kind of the game script that things are trending towards. Yeah, there's a
Real
couple
quick,
things
do you
here.
think yeah, because I wanted to get your take here. Maybe you're gonna bring it up here, but like it's like, do you think now off these last couple of weeks that could it also be that if we think the Carolina's an average kind of team, we know what the Giants are dealing with from an injury standpoint, that they're kind of saying maybe this is a 27-14 kind of game. Maybe, like you had given that script in the last one against the Rams. Is this kind of like where, hey, Carolina, if you can be consistent, even without McCaffrey, you want to run Hubbard, right? Like you can just kind of log your way to success here against this Giants team, given that their offense is so depleted.
Well, so what I find fascinating about this is 75% of all money is going
Hello.
in on the Carolina Panthers right now. So every single person, every single, average bettor is just saying, "Give me Carolina to win this game by field goal. Like I got this. It's going to be good." I would not be shocked if this moves up to 3.5 or 4 points before game time. And then maybe the hour before game time, the sharps in Vegas start hammering the Giants. Because when you think about it, there's no Christian McCaffrey. The Carolina Panthers have come back to earth a little bit. All the betting public is basically saying, let's bet on Carolina, let's bet on Carolina. This is one of those where you just wish if both teams were at full strength, like how much different would this line be? Would this line significantly change if Christian McCaffrey was in the backfield and the Giants had Andrew Thomas, Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney, and Saquon Barkley? Like, does the line move at all if everybody's healthy?
I think it would move a little bit in the favor of the Giants because again of all the injuries they have, right? If the offense is stronger, if you have health there, then you think, well, weapons, right? Ability to score points. Right now, I think it's trending this way because of everything the Giants are dealing with, as opposed to this one piece here or there for Carolina. Now, Christian McCaffrey, as far as one pieces go, is an enormous piece. But I would think this would be a somewhat neutral kind of game. Whereas right now, again, at home, you're supposed to be getting 3 points. So that means, neutral site, the Giants would not be favored to start there either, or they'd be getting what? A touchdown if they were on the road in Carolina for this game, right? So that, from that perspective, the general consensus is Carolina in this moment, in this week, is a better team on paper than the New York Football Giants. And I would have to think if you gave the Giants a Kadarius Toney, even, right? If you gave him a Kenny Galladay, if you gave him an offensive tackle, you'd say, yeah, maybe even money and maybe even Carolina getting, 1.5 or something on the road.
Yeah. So Adam, I am dangerously leaning towards taking the Giants in this one
Wow.
because it
Wow.
just feels it just feels I always say this and I've said this to you, you're never as good as the best game that you put on film and you're never as bad as the worst game tape that you have. And
Mm-hmm.
guess what? The Giants last week played their worst game. They got pummeled by the Rams. Daniel Jones had his worst game, has people saying, "See, I told you so. Daniel Jones stinks." I would feel much more confident if Andrew Thomas was out there just to give Daniel Jones even just a little bit more time than what Nate Pert and Matt Solder are going to be able to put out there. But you know what? I'm feeling frisky on this one, Adam. And
Hello.
and I am going to take the Giants in this one. I am going to take them 23-17 is what I think the final is. I do think the first team to 20 wins.
Yeah.
I think the Carolina offense is a little bit um, of smoke and mirrors without Christian McCaffrey. They have Chuba Hubbard back there. Sam Arnold has shown that he has the propensity to turn the ball over. This has to be the game where the defense looks around at each other and says, guys, it's time. Like, we should be able to beat this team. Like, the New York Jets defense gave up 19 points against them. The Philadelphia Eagles defense gave up 18 points against them. Like, these are games that are under 20 points that give your team a chance to win. And this Giants defense doesn't have that many injuries out there. You still have Leonard Williams. You still have Adoree Jackson. You still have James Bradbury. Jabril Peppers hasn't been traded yet. You have McKinney, Love. You've got Logan Ryan. This is literally the game where the Giants defense says, we need to go out and win one. It's not just good enough to play okay. Like, we need to force turnovers, force Sam Darnold into uncomfortable situations. And I actually think the Giants defense is going to say, we need to put 7 points on the board for our team to win this game.
Little bit of a gut check game, right? I mean, listen, whatever we said and where we think the franchise is and what needs to happen going forward, this is a gut check game for whatever the coach speak from Joe Judge. You're 1-5. Whatever's going to happen the rest of the year, though, this is a game that you can go win, right? If there's a sense of pride, if this locker room is still believes in one another, if they're all still together on this thing, then this is a game you have to go win. And to your point, the defense is healthy for the most part. We know we don't have Blake Martinez. You got to deal with that, right? But this is an opportunity, I think, to your point, for the defense to be the team, to be the unit on this team that says, we're going to do the heavy lifting here. And if Daniel Jones and this decimated offense can give us 14 points offensively, 17 points offensively, we'll get you the extra 6. We'll get you that extra touchdown, to your point, right? We'll get the big turnover here, because as much as I said from his Jets days that Sam Darnold, victim of circumstance, didn't have a lot of talent around him, I think that that's true. And also, I still only put him as being a serviceable quarterback in the NFL. And that's what I think he is. And that's what I think he's shown to be to this point of the season. So, the Carolina offense doesn't, as you said, doesn't have a key player in the running back position. Robbie Anderson has had a kind of an off, weird year for himself. These are very favorable matchups for the New York Football Giants. Quick note on Jabril Peppers. They mentioned it. And a few quick takeaways before we get out the door. He was asked about the trade deadline and speculation. He said, I just want to win, baby. I just want to get out there and make plays and win games. Now, some speculation around. Does that mean you want to be a part of the Giants? Because we're not winning a lot of games right now. Would you rather be going out there and winning, baby, for a team that's competing? In that regard, I want the Giants to have a good week. I want some guys to put some good film on tape so that if there's an opportunity to move some players, that the Giants, give an opportunity for teams to come knocking for them. Last little footnote is that Daniel Jones grew up as not only a Carolina Panther fan, but also a Steve Smith fan. So usually, right, players that grew up as a fan of teams, they want to put on that big show. So maybe Daniel Jones on the offensive side of it, however many points you think they need, Daniel Jones is going to have to get that job done. And last little footnote, remember, in the matchups where the Giants have faced defenses that brought edge rushing pressure, as opposed to facing Aaron Donald last week, where it's on the inside that all of that pressure is coming, where they can be disruptive at the point of attack there, the Giants have done a decent job. I know that we got a lot of different cast of characters, but they've been able to mitigate the Washington football team, right? They've been able to mitigate those edge rushing presence. So if Jason Garrett can do his job and scheme to some success, and if Daniel Jones can play his role, you just need guys to step up, like a Sterling Shepard, like a Darius Slayton, John Ross dealing with injuries. Who knows who it's going to be? we don't know. Caden Smith, Rudolph, Evan Ingram, dare I say, put on the good tape so you can get yourself out of this building, whatever it looks like. I've been consistent with this, friends. I take the Giants. I take the Giants every single week. I've been doing it the last handful of weeks, regardless of what my mind may be telling me. I like your line, man. 23-17 makes a lot of sense to me. I'll even, because I am a little bit tepid on what to expect here, I'll go 21-17. I'll say the Giants get there. I think, and again, defensive touchdown wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Giants can do this thing, though. Take the under, take Big Blue, 2-5, the reminiscence, the embers of hope burning inside the New York Football Giants.
Adam, I'm excited. You and I are on the same page since week 1. So let's hope that we have different fortunes than what that Broncos game was, but you and I are in the same boat. Giants need this defense to step up in a big way. Let's see some players show up and show out. Jabril Peppers, we're looking at you. I hope he gets 65% of the snaps and comes out fired up, and he just wants to win. Well, go show that you can win against the Carolina Panthers, my friend.
Yep. Let's see some excitement. Let's see some play. Let's see some young talent. At the end of the day, all you can do is hope for the best, put on your big blue cap, and root for the team. That's the deal. As upset as we may be, as disappointed as we may be as how the season started, you still show up every single Sunday to root for the team, and then you come on the next day and you talk a bunch of crap about them. So that's what we're going to look to do. We'll see if it works out for the Giants or not. As always, friends, you can follow us on social media at One Giant Podcast. You can rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Go over to YouTube, see our big, beautiful faces. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and demand those people know,
as always, let's go Big Blue.